Let's bring in Republican Senate Majority Whip John Thune of South Dakota. Good to be with you, Senator. Thanks for joining us on this occasion where we're all together.
I should say thanks for having me.
So, former Attorney General Bill Barr, who, as we pointed out, appointed John Durham, was on special report last night. Here's what he said about the Durham report. Listen here.
And both the press and the FBI abandoned any semblance of professionalism and took up the cause with a vengeance. And I think the real story here from the FBI's perspective is what an abomination this was, this so-called investigation. If it wasn't a witch hunt, it's a damn good imitation of one.
An abomination is how he described it. How would you describe what you saw from the Durham report?
Well, I mean, it was clear it was a very politicized investigation. I think everybody kind of knew that at the time, but this verifies it. I mean, it confirms everything that people believed, and that is that the FBI, clearly had an agenda there, and were really out of their lane. And I think this verified that. Chris Wray has supposedly made some changes, some reforms to the way that the FBI does things, and I think that's important because transparency and accountability in government is critical, and especially in an agency that's responsible for law enforcement. People need to be able to have confidence that an agency like that's not being politicized, and clearly it was in this case.
Dare I ask, Senator, if anybody's going to learn any lessons from this, media or otherwise?
Yeah, well, in media, of course, we got a couple, prizes awarded for coverage of all that, and which is just incredibly ironic. But that being said, there's going to be, I think, the follow-up hearings. The House next week is going to have Durham up there and have him testify. So I think it'll shed more light on what actually happened. But it's a good reminder and a good lesson, I think, to all of us about, the way that even, the institutions that people should have confidence in this country can oftentimes get politicized.
Senator Lindsey Graham and Congressman Jim Jordan said that they think that some people are owed a few apologies. Listen to how they put it.
Wouldn't it be nice for the agency to apologize to those that their lives are ruined? Wouldn't it be nice to the press to admit we got it wrong? None of that's going to happen.
The very people who told us things that weren't true are now out there telling us on TV, oh, you can't trust the Durham report. Like, are you kidding me?
You mentioned a couple of news organizations, New York Times and Washington Post, were awarded Pulitzers for their coverage of the Russia collusion scandal, which did not have the added benefit of being true. But I don't expect anybody's going to apologize. I don't expect anybody
good luck with
giving
that.
back Pulitzers.
Right? Yeah. Well, true. That's not going to happen. But it should. There should be. I think there's reputational damage associated with this, and organizations that got out there and really bought into this hook, line, and sinker ought to pay a price for it. And the prizes aren't going back, but hopefully there will be a price that's paid.
All right, Senator Thune, so what's happening with this debt ceiling? It's got the president, cutting his trip short. One of our reporters, I actually ran a race with him this morning, Grady Trimble. He had this exchange with Jamie Dimon on what this all means for the bank. Everybody wants to know what this means for us as a country, what it means for the average American. And he had this question for Jamie Dimon about the banking system. Listen.
What would it do to the banking system?
Actual default would be a disaster, and this has been said consistently over and over. You're just repeating it.
So are you optimistic about a deal?
Let them worry about that.
Are you optimistic about a deal?
I'm getting more optimistic, but for a long time, 100 days, Biden was missing in action. I mean, there was no attempt at all to enter into negotiation with the speaker. Now, finally, that's happening, and they're actually getting the right people in the room. I've been saying for a long time they need decisions makers in there, not low-level people. And finally, that's happening. So maybe with the closers in the room, we can narrow in on a deal. But there are a couple of things about this to me that really strike me as odd. One, Biden's taking office next week, and there doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency around it. And Janet Yellen, every time she talks about this deadline, she says June 1 or maybe that first week in June, and then revenue spike middle of the month. You get the feeling in a way that we're kind of being played on this. And so, and they seem to be stalling. And I think the Democrats always use the clock to their advantage. They try and run out the clock.
You really think Janet Yellen's playing
No, I don't think so. I'm not saying
politics?
I don't think she's playing politics, but I don't think she's been very transparent. She's always attaching caveats to what she said. So we're sitting there wondering, is it really June 1? And, what's the administration honestly going to do here? Because they have not, to me, demonstrated the sense of urgency that you think there would be if you're literally up against that deadline. If it is June 1, you got to act in the House, you got to act in the Senate, which takes time, you got to write the deal up, and they don't even have a deal yet. And they finally, just yesterday, agreed to get the right people in the room.
Yeah, okay, so in terms of your chamber, in terms of what's happening in the Senate, Chuck Schumer said earlier today that what we need is a bipartisan bill with bipartisan support. He chided McCarthy for not having a bipartisan bill, one that was passed along party lines, though it was the only thing that constituted actually, here's a proposal. But what to you would a bipartisan deal constitute?
Well, I mean, I think there are things that the House put on the table, and honestly, it is the only thing out there right now, and it's incumbent on the president now to enter into a negotiation, because those are the two entities that are going to have to agree to get a bill signed into law that raises the
But for you, does there have to be spending caps?
Well, I think spending caps, I think clawing back unspent COVID money, I think some of these proposals on work requirements are very fair, and they're good policy changes that would yield fiscal benefits down the road. And I think, permitting reforms that would allow energy projects
so
to get
basically
going
you're saying
faster.
the Republican bill is what you're
Well, no, I mean, that doesn't include everything, but those are things on which there's bipartisan agreement, and they ought to make a deal. We've got a $31 trillion debt, and the amount that we're paying for interest from 22 to 23 is increasing by 39%. We're going to spend $663 billion this year just on interest, which is approaching what we spend on national security.
Can I just follow up on one thing? You were talking about the moving deadline. I mean, it is a moving deadline. I mean, we're in a changing interest rate environment where the revenue stream changes, it comes, it goes.
Right.
I mean, are you getting updates on that? Could you just know when that could be happening?
No, and I'm hoping they're going to give us more specific updates, but we think there's more there than what they're telling us. And I think even the leadership on...
Do you have a date?
No, I mean, like I said, it's kind of it's a little bit of a, there's a lot of squish room in that. And that makes me uncomfortable, because I know how they've acted in the past, and they run the clock out and then try and jam you with something and say, take it or leave it.
Senator, great to see you in here today.
Interesting.
Nice to be with you.
Thanks,
Appreciate it,
Senator.
John. Thanks,
Good to
Sandra.
see you.
You too.